Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. We had a bunch of requests to dig into Jeff Thompson's The Throws and Takedowns of Sambo Russian Wrestling, and, well, today's the day.
Yeah, you guys really wanted this one. Should be fun.
So full disclosure up front, neither of us are like Sambo masters or anything,
Right.
but, I mean, everyone knows Jeff Thompson knows his stuff, right? He's trained in, what, like a zillion martial arts?
Pretty much.
And in this book, he's sharing his favorite Sambo throws.
Right, and the cool thing is he actually learned these directly from a Sambo master named Vadim Kolganov, a master of sport.
So, like, legit lineage.
Oh, yeah.
And he's not trying to cover every single Sambo throw out there, just the ones that, like, really click for him.
Exactly, the ones he found most effective.
So our mission today is to kind of, like, pull out the core principles, the key takeaways, what makes Sambo ticking, how do you get someone down, and how does that all connect to, like, grappling in general and also, self-defense? What can we actually use?
All good questions.
Okay, so step one, Sambo. What is it and where did it come from? Help us out here.
Right, so right off the bat, the book says Sambo is, quote, an authentic Russian art, end quote. And that's interesting because so many martial arts are, kind of derivatives of something else.
Right, like they evolved from earlier styles.
Exactly. But Thompson's making a point that Sambo is its own thing. And to really get that, I think we need to zoom out and think about wrestling in general. I mean, wrestling has been around forever.
Oh yeah, forever.
Like way back. The book mentions Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Oh right, the super old Sumerian poem.
Yeah. So Gilgamesh is this legendary figure, right? And he's famous for his strength and wrestling ability.
It's like a primal thing, isn't it?
It really is. And then you have Hercules in Greek mythology, the son of Zeus. He's another prime example of a wrestling hero.
Right, those classic stories are full of wrestling matches.
Exactly. It's like wrestling is woven into the very fabric of human storytelling.
It's like this universal thing across cultures.
Totally. And the book actually gives us some concrete examples. It talks about Egyptian pyramids, thousands of years old. And you can see these depictions of wrestling techniques on the walls.
Wow, seriously?
Yeah, the book says around 400 of these images have been found. And what's wild is that some of those techniques are still used today. It's incredible.
That blows my mind. Like, the stuff we're doing today has a connection to those guys wrestling on those pyramid walls.
Right. It's like this direct line through history.
That's so cool.
And then fast forward to ancient Greece, and you have the palestras, these training grounds where young men would, exercise and learn all sorts of skills. And wrestling was a huge part of that. It wasn't just like a hobby. It was seen as essential for physical and mental development.
Right, it was like part of their whole education, wasn't it?
Totally. And of course, we can't forget about the ancient Olympics.
Oh yeah, the original Olympics.
Wrestling was a key event there, both on its own, one-on-one wrestling, and also as part of this crazy event called the Pancratium.
Okay, tell me about that. Pancratium. Sounds intense.
Oh, it was super intense. It was basically no holds barred fighting. They allowed punches, kicks, grappling, pretty much anything goes except biting and gouging. It was as close as you got to actual combat in a sporting setting back then.
Wow, so it was like the ultimate test.
Yeah, totally. And you can see how those ancient competitions, with their focus on practical fighting skills, probably had a huge influence on the development of all sorts of martial arts down the line.
That makes sense. It's like that primal fighting spirit getting channeled into structured systems.
Right, exactly.
But wrestling didn't just stay in ancient Egypt and Greece, right? It spread. It evolved.
Exactly. The Roman military, for example, they were all about wrestling. They incorporated it into their training because they knew it was essential for hand-to-hand combat.
Right, because when the swords break, you got to do something.
Exactly. And then you jump ahead to medieval Europe. Knights, they're famous for their armor and their sword fighting, but they wrestled too.
They did.
Oh,
really?
Yeah. The book even mentions this 15th century wrestling manual by a guy named Talhofer. It's a German manual with pictures and instructions on different techniques.
That is so cool. What's in the manual?
Well, it shows various wrestling holds and takedowns. And get this, some of them actually look surprisingly similar to jiu-jitsu techniques.
Whoa, seriously?
It's wild. It shows that this grappling knowledge has been around for a long time and has been passed down through the ages.
And it wasn't just for soldiers and knights either. It was a part of everyday life.
You got it. Back then, wrestling was a popular activity at fairs and festivals, weddings even. They'd have these big wrestling matches as part of the celebration.
It's like a totally different world.
It really is. Medieval manuscripts and calendars, they show wrestling everywhere. It was just a part of life.
That's fascinating. So it sounds like wrestling has always been this, like, really widespread activity.
It has. And as different countries developed their own unique fighting styles, their own national traditions, wrestling almost always remained a central component. Alongside things like fencing, running, swimming, wrestling was right up there.
It was like one of the core physical activities.
Absolutely. And I think that shows just how fundamental and important it's been across so many cultures for centuries.
So, okay, we've got this huge, long history of wrestling around the world. But how did all that lead to Sambo in Russia? Like, what's the specific connection?
Well, Russian wrestling itself had this really rich tradition, drawing inspiration from all sorts of international techniques. They valued strength, agility, endurance, and wrestling matches were a common way to end festivals and sometimes even settle disputes between people. They even had designated areas for these contests, which is kind of cool.
So, like, wrestling was the go-to way to settle arguments.
In some cases, yeah.
Interesting. So when did Sambo actually emerge?
Sambo, as we know it, came about during the Soviet Union in the early 20th century. It was developed by coaches and athletes who wanted to create a system that combined the best aspects of these national and international wrestling styles while also adding in practical self-defense elements. So it was meant to be this like well-rounded system that you could use both for sport and for real-life situations.
It's like they took all those different wrestling styles and blended them into something new.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes Sambo so interesting, I think. It has this really diverse set of influences.
Okay, so it had both a sporting and a self-defense focus right from the start.
Exactly. And that's actually a key distinction within Sambo itself. There's sport Sambo, which draws on all sorts of techniques from national and international wrestling styles. And then there's combat Sambo, which specifically includes self-defense elements like striking and defenses against strikes.
So it's like adaptable depending on what you're training for.
Right.
Interesting. But I read that the name Sambo didn't come about right away.
Oh, yeah, that's true. The name actually went through, like, a bunch of changes over time.
Give us the history of the Sambo name.
So early on, it was called self-defense, which makes sense, right?
Straight to the point.
Yeah, no messing around. Then it was Samos, then System Sam, then freestyle wrestling, then freestyle Sambo wrestling, and finally just Sambo wrestling.
Wow, so the name literally evolved as the art itself developed.
It really did. It's like they were trying to find the perfect term to capture what it was all about.
And the book mentions there's some debate about like who was really responsible for Sambo's creation.
Yeah, that's right. The official story is that it was recognized by the Soviet Union in November of 1938, but some people think that, Sambo competitions were already happening in the early 30s or even earlier. It's a little murky.
So like the exact origins are still kind of debated.
Yeah, kind of like a lot of martial arts, actually. But the book focuses on three main figures: V.A. Spiridonov, B.C. Oshipkov, and A.A. Zarlampiev.
Those are some serious Russian names.
Right. And each of those guys played a big role in developing Sambo and getting it recognized.
Like they were the pioneers.
Exactly.
So, okay, we know a little bit about Sambo's background, but what are the core ideas behind it? What are the fundamental principles?
So the book lists a bunch of key tenets like will to win, fitness, courage, strength, quickness, and adroitness. But I think ultimately it boils down to the ability to defend yourself without relying on weapons.
Right, so it's about being effective in unarmed combat.
Exactly, and that's why it's considered so valuable for self-defense, because you're not relying on something you might not have access to in a dangerous situation.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's get into some actual techniques now. Chapter 1 of Thompson's book is called Balance, Stance, Grip. And, I mean, those are pretty much universal to grappling, right?
Yeah, they're the foundation of pretty much every grappling art, but each art has its own way of approaching those fundamentals.
So what's the Sambo take on balance, stance, and grip?
Well, the book stresses the importance of having a good stance, one that's both stable and mobile. It suggests a 45-degree lead stance with your left foot forward, but it also says you can reverse it depending on what feels comfortable for you.
Okay, so not super rigid about the stance.
Exactly. The point is to have a base that allows you to move easily and react quickly to your opponent's movements.
That makes sense. You don't want to be, stuck in one position.
Right. And the book makes a really good point about how to develop good balance. mat work.
Mm.
Basically, you got to actually wrestle to get a real feel for it.
Yeah, experience is the best teacher, as they say.
Totally. But the book also tries to, give you the basics so that you're practicing correctly from the get-go. That way you avoid developing bad habits, which can be tough to break later on.
Right, it's harder to unlearn something than to learn it right in the first place.
Exactly. So a good stance and good balance set you up for success in Sambo.
Okay, so what about grip? Does Sambo have any specific grip preferences?
Yeah, it does. The book describes the standard grip as your left hand on the opponent's right lapel, and it says that can be a jacket, a coat, even their neck or hair in a street situation, and your right hand controlling their left sleeve, wrist, or the back of their triceps, particularly in a wrestling context.
Okay, so it's like a two-on-one control.
Yeah,
You're basically trying to control that whole side of their body.
exactly. And the book says that while you might not always get this ideal grip in a real fight, it's important to practice it so you can adapt to different situations.
So, like, the more comfortable you are with that basic grip, the better you'll be able to adjust when things get messy.
Exactly. And we all know, anyone who's done any kind of grappling knows that grip fighting is a huge part of it, especially as you get to higher levels.
Oh, yeah, it's like its own little battle within the match.
Totally. The book actually mentions that in high-level Sambo, the person who wins the grip battle often has a huge advantage.
Because they're basically dictating the terms of the engagement.
Exactly. But I think for the average person, for self-defense purposes, mastering the basics is a good place to start.
Okay, makes sense. So you've got your stance, you've got your grip. Now, how do you think about actually taking someone down in Sambo?
So the key principle here is breaking the opponent's balance.
Makes sense. You can't really throw someone if they're standing solid.
Exactly. The book says that, especially on the mat, against someone who knows what they're doing, you have to disrupt their balance before you can throw them.
So how do you do that?
Well, there are a bunch of ways. You can push or pull them in different directions, to their left rear, directly behind them, right rear, or to their sides. You can pull them forward, pull them downwards. It's about finding that point where they're off balance and exploiting it.
And it sounds like it's not just about brute force. There's a finesse to it.
Right, it's like a feeling. The book talks about developing a sense of their energy and using it against them. And honestly, the best way to develop that is just like hours on the mat, getting that hands-on experience.
Right? You can't really learn that from a book, can you?
Nope. You gotta feel it.
Okay, so you're feeling their balance, looking for that opening. But what about when you're dealing with someone who's, like, super tense and resisting? The book mentions this thing called the stiff armor.
Oh, yeah, the stiff armor. We've all encountered that guy.
Who is the stiff armor?
So basically, it's someone who's like scared and tense, and they're gripping onto you for dear life, trying to stop you from moving. They're not really trying to do anything. They're just trying not to get thrown.
Right. Like they're frozen up.
Exactly. And the book says that to deal with this, you need good grip work and a sense of flow of using their resistance against them.
So it's about being adaptable, not trying to force it.
Yeah, like you move with the resistance, you don't try to fight it directly. But the book also has some, shall we say, more direct advice for the street.
Oh, like what?
Well, it suggests things like kicks to the groin or headbutts to the face to break that stiff arm hold.
Right, because in a self-defense situation, you got to do what you got to do.
It's exact.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about when your opponent's not wearing, like, a thick jacket?
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of these throws are shown with the attacker grabbing the opponent's jacket.
Right, and in real life, people aren't always walking around in judo J's.
Exactly. So what do you do when you're dealing with someone in a thin t-shirt or no shirt at all?
It seems like it'd be a lot harder to get a good grip.
It is. But the book has some answers for this too. It says that in those situations, you might want to switch to wrestling-type throws that utilize the opponent's limbs more directly.
Oh, like what?
Well, it mentions things like Greco-Roman snatches, which were all about upper body control and lifts, and freestyle leg takedowns. Those techniques don't rely so much on having a good grip on the opponent's clothing.
So it's about adapting your approach based on what the situation calls for.
Exactly. And Thompson actually has this funny line in the book where he says that, quote, someone dressed in heavy tweed is ideal for almost any throw, end quote.
That's great. I can just imagine him saying that.
Right. But the underlying point is serious. Being adaptable is crucial.
Okay, so we've talked about the principles, the challenges. Now let's get into some specific techniques.
Let's do it.
Thompson starts with the double leg pickup. That one's pretty common in wrestling, right?
Yeah, it's a classic takedown. Basically, you shoot in under the opponent's arms, grab both their legs, and lift them up.
So, like, you're going for a power move.
Yeah, it can be. And the book says it's especially effective from outside gripping range because it has that element of surprise.
Right, you're catching them off guard.
Exactly. You're driving forward, getting low, and using your legs to lift them up and over. Ideally, you want to land them on their back or even their head. It can also be done from a kneeling position.
So, like, if you find yourself on your knees in front of someone, you can still hit this takedown.
Exactly.
And the book actually compares it to a rugby tackle, which makes sense.
Yeah, it's a very similar motion. But there's one really important detail Thompson emphasizes.
What's that?
Head placement. He says you got to be careful not to put your head in the wrong spot or they could catch you in a guillotine choke.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And once you've got them down, you have a few options. You can continue the fight on the ground, or you could go for a leg lock, which is something Sambo is known for, or you can create some space and transition back to striking.
So it opens up different possibilities.
Exactly.
And I like how Thompson adds in that little caveat about throws in general. He says you shouldn't necessarily go for a throw if you're still within striking range.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. He basically sees throws as more of a backup tactic in close combat. Like, if you're in a position to punch, punch. Don't go looking for a throw.
It's like prioritize striking unless the situation really calls for a takedown.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on. The next technique he covers is the single leg to double leg takedown. How's that different from the regular double leg?
So with this one, you're basically using the opponent's own attack against them.
Give me an example.
Like, let's say they throw a kick or a knee at you. You can catch that leg and use it to set up the double leg takedown. So you're not just going in for the double leg right away.
Yeah.
You're using their momentum to your advantage.
So it's like a counterattack.
Exactly. And Thompson actually breaks down the techniques step by step in the book. It starts with a standard right grip and stance. Then you release your left hand, wrap it around the back of their knee, the right knee, if they're throwing a right leg attack, and secure that leg. Then you release your right hand from their lapel, lower your body, and hook your right arm around the back of their other leg, completing the double leg and taking them down.
Okay. I'm starting to see how these techniques work together.
Yeah, there's definitely a flow to it.
So next up, we have a bunch of single leg pickup variations.
Yes, the single leg pickup, and its many variations.
There are a few different types of reaps involved in these. What's a reap?
So basically, a reap is when you use your leg to sweep or hook the opponent's supporting leg out from under them. It's like you're taking away their base.
And the reap is what sends them to the ground.
Exactly.
Okay, so the first single leg variation we're looking at is the reverse leg inner reap.
Okay, so with this one, you start by securing the opponent's right leg with your left arm, same as before.
Right, like you're going for that single leg pickup.
Exactly. But then, instead of going straight for the lift, you hook your right leg around the back of their left supporting leg, the inside of their leg, and you reap it off the ground.
So you're using your leg to take out their base.
Exactly. And at the same time, you're driving them backwards using your grip on their lapel.
That's cool. And it seems like you have a lot of control over how hard they land.
Yeah, Thompson mentions that too. He says you can be gentle with it or you can really drive them into the ground. It depends on the situation. And there's actually a simpler version of this technique where you just trip them without doing the full reap.
So like a less forceful takedown.
Exactly. You just put your leg behind theirs and push.
Yeah.
Simple but effective.
I like it. Okay, next we have the single leg pickup, reverse leg outer reap. How is that different from the inner reap?
So the setup is almost the same, but instead of reaping the inside of their supporting leg, you're hooking your leg around the back and outside of their left supporting leg. It's like a slightly different angle.
And is it more effective?
Well, Thompson says it's more technical and it can be more dangerous because the fall is usually more awkward. But like the inner reap, you can also modify it into a simpler tripping technique.
So basically it's like an advanced version of the inner reap.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, next up is the single leg pickup, minor inner reap. That name sounds a bit less intense.
Yeah, this one's a little different. Instead of a big sweeping motion, you're basically taking the single leg down with a kick or a sweep against their supporting ankle.
So you're not going for a huge throw.
Right. Thompson actually says he prefers to use this in a way that doesn't injure the ankle, so it might be more suitable for like real-life self-defense situations where you don't want to cause unnecessary damage.
That makes sense. And of course, you've got that option to just trip them as well.
Right, same as with the other reap techniques.
Okay, so those are the reap variations. Next up is the single leg pickup body drop. That sounds a bit more complex.
It is. This one's a little harder to master, but it's also one of the most effective throws in the book.
Okay, walk me through it.
So, you start with a right grip and stance, and you pick up their left leg with your right arm, just like the regular single leg pickup.
Right, got it.
But then you turn your back to the opponent and bring your left leg behind you in a semicircular motion.
You're turning away from them.
Yeah, and at the same time, you're thrusting your right leg across in front of their remaining supporting leg, the one you haven't picked up.
Okay, so you're basically using your legs to trip them up.
Exactly. And as you're doing all that, you lift their captured leg high and pull down hard on their sleeve to really help them over. You're basically pulling them onto your extended leg, and then you bend and straighten your left leg as you complete the throw.
That's a lot to coordinate.
It is. But when it's done right, it's devastating.
And that turning of the back seems key, like it really changes the leverage.
Definitely.
Okay, next up is the ankle pickup.
Mm-hmm.
Thompson seems to really like this one. He says it's simple but super effective.
Oh, yeah. He's a big fan of the ankle pickup. And it really is simple. You basically reach down, grab their ankle, and pull it up and towards you while simultaneously pulling their weight to your left.
And that's enough to take them down.
Often, yeah. It's amazing how much just disrupting that ankle can throw off their balance. And the best part is you can do it from a standing position, or even if you're on the ground.
What? Really?
Yeah, Thompson tells the story about one of his students who was in a street fight, and he ended up on the ground. And guess what? He used the ankle pickup from the ground to take his attacker down.
That's wild. It's like a secret weapon you can use from anywhere.
Right.
Okay, so ankle pickup from the outside, but there's also an inside version, right?
Yeah, there is. It uses a slightly different leverage point. Instead of grabbing the ankle from the outside, you reach down and grab it from the inside.
Okay, I see.
And at the same time, you thrust your elbow into the inside of their calf muscle. So you're pulling on their ankle and pushing with your elbow.
That's smart. You're hitting them from two angles at once.
Exactly.
Okay, and finally we get to the belt-assisted throws.
Ah, yes. The belt throws, a classic.
But Thompson makes a point of saying that these can be done with any clothing, not just a belt.
Yeah, that's important. In a real fight, you might not have a belt to grab, but you can use a jacket, a shirt, anything you can get a hold of.
Right, you're adapting to the situation.
Exactly. So the first one we'll look at is the belt-assisted hip throw.
And how do you do that?
So you reach your right arm over the opponent's back and grip their belt or whatever you're using, and then you turn your hip into them. You want your lower back to make contact with their lower abdomen.
Okay, so you're getting tight.
Yeah, and then you straighten your legs while pulling them onto your hips, and you throw them over your back.
That sounds powerful.
Oh, it is. And Thompson actually mentions that Russians really favor this across the back grip in both sparring and self-defense.
Interesting.
And he also mentions two variations on this throw. There's the belt-assisted uchimata, where you add a sweeping leg action between the opponent's legs, and the belt-assisted harai goshi, where you sweep your leg to the outside of their thigh.
So, like, the belt grip sets up all sorts of possibilities.
Right. It's a very versatile technique.
Okay, and lastly, there's the belt-assisted major outside reap.
Oh, yeah, this one's a real showstopper.
How does it work?
So you start with a grip on their belt or clothing over their right shoulder. Then you step forward with your left leg to the outside of their right leg and simultaneously sweep your right leg across the back of their right leg, hard and straight. And at the same time, you're using your grip on their belt to drive their weight forward onto that same leg.
Wow, so you're combining the leg sweep with that upper body control to really send them flying.
Exactly. And Thompson says he's been on the receiving end of this throw in sparring, so he knows firsthand how effective it can be.
I'll bet. So we've covered a lot of ground here. What's Thompson's overall take on using these throws?
Well, he reminds us that these are just his favorite throws. There are lots of other throws in Sambo, many of which are similar to techniques you'd find in other wrestling styles.
Makes sense.
But he really stresses the importance of perfect practice. He says that just repeating a technique over and over isn't enough. You have to really focus on getting it right, on developing the proper feel and timing.
Right, quality over quantity.
Exactly. Because if you keep practicing something the wrong way, you'll just ingrain bad habits.
That's true for anything, I think.
Totally. And in terms of self-defense, his main piece of advice is to avoid physical confrontation whenever possible.
That's always good advice.
Yeah, if you can talk your way out of a situation or just walk away, that's always the best option. But if you can't avoid a fight, and it looks like you're going to be attacked, he says, attack first.
So be proactive. Don't just wait for them to make the first move.
Right. And he sees grappling and throwing as more of a contingency plan. Like, if someone manages to grab hold of you, or if your initial strikes don't work, you can use these techniques to take them down.
So it's like a backup plan, not necessarily your primary strategy.
Right. He even says you should avoid intentionally entering grappling range in a real fight, especially if there's more than one attacker. He's all about striking first and aiming for a decisive finish if possible.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But he also acknowledges that mistakes happen. So he emphasizes being prepared for the worst-case scenario, which is ending up on the ground.
So even though he prioritizes striking, he recognizes that grappling skills are essential. Okay, so to wrap things up, we've gone pretty deep on Sambo. We've talked about its history, its principles, and a whole bunch of specific techniques. What are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think one big takeaway is just how universal wrestling is. It's been around for centuries in so many different cultures,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating to see how those ancient traditions have influenced the development of a modern martial art like Sambo.
Yeah, it's like this thread that runs through history.
Totally. And I think another important point is just how much emphasis Sambo places on the fundamentals. Balance, stance, grip. Those things might seem basic, but they're absolutely essential for any kind of grappling.
Right, you got to have a solid foundation.
Exactly. And finally, I think Thompson's practical approach to self-defense is really valuable. He's not about fancy techniques or unrealistic scenarios. He's about being adaptable, being prepared for anything, and ultimately avoiding violence whenever possible.
Absolutely. Great insights. So to leave our listeners with one final thought, if we think about Sambo and how it blends together these ancient wrestling traditions with the practical demands of modern combat, what other areas in life might have similar hidden connections and insights that we could apply in unexpected ways? What invisible tools beyond the physical ones might we discover by looking at history and focusing on practical application? Think about that. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Thanks, everyone.